Well, good morning, everybody. I think it's still morning, although if you're in East Tennessee, I suppose it's afternoon. I'm delighted to be here, and Sherelle is a tough act to follow. Good grief, I'm the last one here on your agenda today, and for the whole session, and I'm just grateful to be here with you. I'm going to shorten my presentation just a touch, keep us on track and on time. And what I'm going to cover today, I'm going to share my screen here just a second. Let's see. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I may need y'all to enable that for me. But essentially what I'm going to cover today, I'm going to run through a slide deck. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to reground us a bit in the data and sort of the urgent need for change in early childhood education. I'm going to highlight a little bit of the how and why early care and education needs to be a priority for our workforce of today and tomorrow. I'm going to do a short overview of Tennesseans for Quality Early Education new Bright Start Tennessee initiative, where we have community partnerships from across the state that are strengthening their local early care and education systems birth to 8. And then I'm going to review TQE's legislative policy priorities and some opportunities for advocates like yourselves to take action during this legislative session. And let's see if it'll let me share my screen yet. There it is. All right, here we go. Okay, so let's jump in and get started here. Let's move to the next slide here. Many of you, I hope, are already familiar with Tennesseans for Quality Early Education in our organization. We are a nonpartisan coalition of advocates for Tennessee's youngest learners. We are especially focused on that critical sort of birth through third grade years, 0 to 8 or 9. And we are historically very focused on policies and advocacy. We have recently, as of last year, made a foray into supporting communities of practice, and particularly supporting through our Bright Start communities, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later, collective impact partnerships that are establishing early care and education plans in their communities. We believe, and I realize I'm really preaching to the choir in much of what I'm going to say today, but perhaps packaging it a little differently. We all know, everyone in this room understands that there's sort of 3 major buckets of supports that children need to be successful really in life, but certainly by third grade. And they include health and development on track beginning at birth. And that, of course, health is inclusive of mental health and social emotional health, as well as physical health, supported and supportive families and communities, and then high quality birth through age 8 learning environments. I always just like to sort of, many of us are familiar with this data, but I'd like to ground us in it. What you're seeing here on this slide is third grade ELA basically reading scores, proficiency levels. And what this shows is that less than a third of third graders are proficient in reading and math. And it also shows that the data disaggregated, which is provided to us by the Department of Education. And you'll see there's concerns across the board, but some subgroups are certainly more in crisis than others due to opportunity gaps. And this next slide really is just the same thing, but it's the math scores and not much better. I gave this presentation originally. Richard asked me to give this presentation to you all. I originally gave it to a group that included some folks who are economic development professionals, and we're talking, in fact, about the importance of workforce. So this slide and sort of the framing of this was a nod to them. But I think everyone probably in this room has an understanding about sort of early care and education impacting both today's workforce and tomorrow's workforce. In terms of tomorrow's workforce, which is what we're largely here today about, is, this incredibly consequential period of time, particularly, the 0 to 5 or even the 0 to 3 years where brain growth is happening. We know that, early literacy and math skills and sort of early soft skills, that's sort of how we talk a little bit with workforce development professionals and economic development professionals about social emotional skills. We refer to them as soft skills, but we know that when our children are in childcare or in school, it's critical that it's high quality, because if it's not, we're really not optimizing brain growth, early literacy and math, and those early soft skills. And then as we move to think about, third grade reading and math, again, this is something I know I don't need to say to this group, but third grade reading and math are both very highly predictive of future academic success. And in fact, children who are not reading at grade level by third grade are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school and 60% less likely to attend post-secondary. And so, you know, when we look at the workforce of today and we think about childcare, we know that today's workforce, and Sherelle just did a great job sort of outlining the importance of childcare, and not just childcare, but also school in the early years as a critical workforce support. Without that, without children and our children and parents realizing and feeling good about their children being in safe and nurturing and educationally rich environments, it really weakens their ability to participate robustly in the workforce. It impacts business productivity, in fact, family economic stability and economic growth. We documented some of that in a report that we gave. I'm going to skip this slide. This is, I think everybody knows and is familiar with the Heckman curve that talks about the cost effectiveness of early education, but I'm going to skip this slide and move on to, I've got something going wrong with my, all right, 1 second. I'm going to switch over to another set of slides because something didn't work here. I have a blank on this slide. 1 second. Give me 30 seconds. I'm going to close this out. Open this next one up and get us back on track. Just 1 second here. Computer's having a problem, but all right. Sharing the screen again. Share. Why is that happening? Give it a second. Is it coming back? Here we go. Okay, it's back. Phew. All right. So in 2019, and this was just prior to the pandemic, we did a report called "Want to Grow Tennessee's Economy, Fix the Child Care Crisis," and we polled 2,300 of parents of children under the age of 5 across the state. And we basically the research basically revealed this. And you can see on this chart on the left side, it looks at the issue of how childcare impacted their parents' ability to participate in the workforce. And you see that 35% had pay or hours reduced or changed to part-time, 32% had to quit or were fired. Nearly 40% turned down new job offers or promotion, and 33% turned down education or training. And this was sort of what were sort of the challenges, the major challenges related to childcare that impacted your workforce participation and productivity. And you can see on the right side there, 50% of them said they had difficulty finding quality care. 63%, nearly 2/3, said affordability was a major issue, and another 2/3 said access was a major issue. And we had economists crunch those numbers and sort of say, okay, how does that impact our economy today? And you can see it's pretty dramatic in terms of the adverse economic losses. The total losses annually, 1.34 billion. The parents were 850 million represents lost earnings for parents. 270 million represents what businesses lost in revenues, and then our taxpayers also were adversely affected. Fast forward to today, we all know that the pandemic has played a significant role in really further hampering and really just decimating almost our childcare industry. And many of you who are out there who have just been champions in my book and in our books in terms of taking care of children and sort of muddling through what's been a very, very difficult 2 years for caregivers. But this is some more recent survey data from care.com, and you can just see basically put into numbers and data here what Sherelle was referring to. So 85% of parents are spending 10% or more of household income on childcare. 46% say finding childcare is more difficult than pre-pandemic. 62% said they're more concerned about the cost of childcare than pre-pandemic. and 94% use at least one major cost-saving measure to save money on childcare, including reducing hours at work, changing jobs, or leaving the workforce completely. Big shout out to some legislation and our legislative sponsors last year who passed the a childcare task force bill, which essentially set forth a task force that is now underway, whose job and charge it is to create a strategic action plan for quality, affordable, accessible childcare in Tennessee. And it's been a great pleasure of mine to work with Commissioner Clarence Carter, who's heading up that work. Sherrell's been very involved with it, and the team at DHS is supporting that task force work, and it's well underway. And I'm very optimistic, and I think we can all have high hopes for the fact that we're going to see some terrific things coming out of there, building on much of what the good work that DHS is already doing and some of the steps that they've already taken and have underway to strengthen our childcare system. Solving childcare in Tennessee, it's not just a government responsibility. Government does have a big role to play. Employers have a role to play, and the childcare industry has a role to play. And we think a little bit, as we think about solving childcare in Tennessee, and we think of those three buckets, we can think about, industry, business models. It is a challenging business model, childcare, with very slim margins, and it's really predominantly an industry of small businesses. So models that leverage economies of scale and sort of reduce or share overhead, like provider networks, are really, I think, a big part of the future of childcare. Employers not only have an opportunity, but I think increasingly realize that it's in their best interest to offer benefits that support employees who are parents, and childcare benefits. There are a variety of different types of childcare benefits that they can offer, and I think it's exciting. Some of the dialogue we're hearing in the engagement by Economic Development Department, who's gotten engaged in this work in providing incentives for businesses and supports for them to do just that. And then certainly government can provide industry supports and monitoring, parent payment assistance, and enrollment supports, among other things. So our next thing, I just want to briefly mention our Bright Start Tennessee network. This is a new statewide network of community partnerships using a collective impact model that are closing achievement and opportunity gaps for our children and their families, and particularly those focused on birth through third grade, in the birth through third grade continuum. The participants currently, the inaugural partnerships who are working with us on Bright Start, include a group of counties in West Tennessee, and that's supported by the United Way of West Tennessee. There are a group of counties, 10 counties in Northeast Tennessee, and that's supported by the Strong Accountable Care Community, and Ballot Health is the backbone organization. In Memphis, there is an effort that is being led by First State Memphis, and in Nashville, it's United Way of Nashville. In Chattanooga, it's Chattanooga 2.0 and the Early Matters team, and in Knoxville, it's the United Way of Knoxville, who are playing backbone roles for large community partnerships. And the goals of this Bright Start network, TQE is supporting this network they're all in the process of developing plans right now, the early care and education plans for birth to third grade. They kicked off last September. The plans will be published late this summer, and initial goals achieved. And you see by 2025, you see that primary goal up there, that gap is that XX% is what's being filled in as part of the planning. All of them are setting goals that ultimately lead to third graders, more third graders being on grade level for reading and math. The Bright Start community partnerships will do a variety of things, but TQE is supporting them to use data to better understand barriers to early learning, identify and leverage existing local and state assets and resources. And that's really important because there are a lot of resources that are available that are untapped and underutilized in our state. Establishing and scaling evidence-based and promising practices. We're developing a clearinghouse of strategies, of evidence-based strategies that the partnerships are tapping into. We're tracking outcomes and using data for continuous improvement. In fact, we're establishing a data dashboard for high quality early learning and for these partnerships and their plans. That's a shared data dashboard. And then of course, these groups are working as a community of practice, and they're sharing learnings among peer communities and with local and state policymakers. And ultimately, they'll be informing our state policy agenda and expanding our advocacy network. And then I'm wrapping up. I just have a couple more slides. I just want to highlight our policy priorities for this year. Excuse me, for this year. One of which is to expand Tennessee's voluntary pre-K program, or VPK program, while also increasing funds that can help certainly grow the per classroom funding which is frankly not been changed well in over a decade. We want to establish recurring funding for pre-K through third grade academic supports. We are looking to really support, and this has been a part of our agenda for a long time, but really support recurring funding for school-based nurses and mental health counselors at best practice ratios. And we really, I mentioned that task force earlier. We're working to identify ways to really engage the larger community in the work of that Tennessee Child Care Task Force and support the task force as it develops that plan that I mentioned. So those are our policy priorities. What you see here is a slide. We do an annual voter survey of voters across Tennessee consistently over and over again. This is our 4th year doing it. Tennesseans across partisan lines overwhelmingly support increased investment in early education and early learning programs. And you see some of that reflected here in these high numbers, 87%, 97%, 90%. Very, very supportive. Tennessee is very supportive of an early learning agenda for our children and wants to see investment made there. Now, the final thing is just a quick call to action. One of the bills that we're actively supporting this year and that's making its way through the legislative session now is Senate Bill 2171, House Bill 2201, which will increase funding for pre-K. You all may or may not know that more than 75% of our school districts across the state have waiting lists for pre-K, and frankly, pre-K is not even advertised widely in many of those cases. So we know there's more than who's on the waiting list who would like their children to have the option to attend. Only 22% of state's 4-year-olds right now, there are only sufficient slots for 22%. So you can, if you are at your computers, your desktops, if you have a phone there, you can go to tqee.org/take-action, and you can support. You can click there with just 2 clicks. You can actually send a message, an email to your legislators, your state policymakers from your districts, your specific districts, and let them know that you support increased funding for pre-K. And this particular bill would direct sports gambling revenues to support increased pre-K. So I hope you'll take that action, and I appreciate being here with you today, and hope I haven't taken up too much time, and I'm wrapping up with enough time for some closing remarks. So thanks for letting me be here, and thanks to all of you for what you do every day for Tennessee's children.
Thank you so much, Blair, for joining us virtually for this year's Children's Advocacy Days.